In 200 BC, just 2 years after utterly defeating Hannibal, Rome initiated the Second Macedonian War. The formidable Roman legions marched into the Greek peninsula, beginning their intervention in the eastern Mediterranean. In that very same year, the Han Empire, which had also just completed its great unification 2 years prior, mustered an army of hundreds of thousands. Led personally by its founding emperor, Liu Bang, they marched north. Their target? To obliterate King Xin of Han, who had rebelled in collusion with the Xiongnu. However, at this moment, the Han Empire was entirely unaware that this campaign would ignite a fateful conflict lasting 3 centuries, the Han-Xiongnu War. On a more profound level, it raised the curtain on a life-and-death struggle between the Chinese agrarian empire and the steppe nomadic empires that would span nearly 2 millennia. The combatants would rise and fall, their titles constantly shifting, but this destined war itself would endlessly endure. At times, the nomadic tribes of the steppe would shatter the Great Wall's defenses, even conquering the central plains, only to be ultimately assimilated by its culture. At other times, a resurgent Chinese empire would sweep across the Gobi Desert, their vanguards reaching as far as Siberia and Central Asia, only to eventually succumb to the crushing financial toll of war and be forced into retreat. As a byproduct of this millennial war, the ensuing butterfly effect profoundly altered the civilizational trajectories of other regions, particularly Europe. If the Mongol conquests 1,400 years later were the spillover effect of a steppe empire's triumph, then 600 years later, the fall of the Western Roman Empire was the spillover effect of the Chinese Empire's triumph. The Han Empire spent 300 years utterly vanquishing the Xiongnu, driving them westward. The resulting ethnic fusion and great migration ultimately brought the Hunnic hordes to the gates of Rome in the 5th century. And the genesis of all this can be traced back to this very pacification campaign by the Han Empire. Liu Bang's target for pacification was King Xin of Han, who had been relocated to the Great Wall frontier. This was a profoundly unreasonable relocation. The original state of Han was situated in the heartland of the Central Plains, a densely populated region rich in iron ore, connecting the vital hubs of Luoyang, Nanyang, and Jianghuai. However, during the great enfeoffment of meritorious officials at the dawn of the Han Dynasty, Liu Bang abruptly moved King Xin to Taiyuan Commandery in the north. Although his royal title remained unchanged, and his nominal jurisdiction expanded from 20 to 31 counties, how could the bitter cold and frontline peril of Taiyuan ever compare to the rich ancestral lands of Yingchuan? Yet King Xin raised no objections. He immediately led his family and state army north to take up his post. This was because King Xin was not merely a meritorious minister of the Han Empire. As a collateral descendant of the Han royal bloodline, his ascent to the throne was entirely reliant on Liu Bang's backing. Even when he had once suffered defeat and been forced to surrender, Liu Bang did not abandon him. It is fair to say that the bond between King Xin and Liu Bang was, at the time, a paragon of mutual trust between a sovereign and his vassal. However, the geographical positioning of the old Han territory was simply too critical. Relocation became the only viable path for the state of Han to survive. Therefore, despite its unreasonableness, King Xin executed the empire's decree. He even departed for Taiyuan with the ambition of forging a glorious legacy on the northern frontier. At this time, a massive strategic vulnerability plagued the northern frontier. This was a loophole left over from the unfinished Great Wall of the Qin Dynasty. Between modern-day Datong and Zhangjiakou, a stretch of roughly 200 kilometers of rolling hills remained unfortified. Consequently, a formidable army was desperately needed to plug this gap. But who could be relied upon? Liu Shi, the king of Dai. As Liu Bang's older brother, he was undoubtedly a master farmer, but utterly hopeless in warfare. In fact, during subsequent Xiongnu invasions, Liu Shi would simply abandon his kingdom and flee. Therefore, to a certain extent, Liu Bang's relocation of King Xin to Taiyuan was not merely to eliminate a threat in the imperial heartland, but also to fortify the border defenses. And King Xin did not betray Liu Bang's heavy trust. No sooner had he arrived in Taiyuan than he proposed moving his royal capital forward, from Jinyang, which lay far behind the lines, to Mai, a military stronghold much further north. Although Mai technically belonged to the state of Dai, Liu Bang gladly consented. What he saw was a King Xin, his loyalty and valor undiminished by time, eager to establish his martial merits on the northern frontier. Yet what Liu Bang and King Xin, these two men of the Central Plains from north of the Yellow River, did not realize was that their adversary had already undergone a profound and terrifying transformation. Exactly 15 years prior, the great Qin general Meng Tian had led 300,000 battle-hardened elites, sweeping across the Ordos region, forcing the Xiongnu to flee north. The Qin army then constructed the Great Wall and established commanderies and counties, heavily fortifying the northern defense line. However, following the sudden death of the first emperor, Meng Tian was forced to commit suicide by a forged decree. The mighty Great Wall legions of the north were subsequently redeployed back to the Central Plains to crush internal rebellions. The entire northern frontier of the Qin Empire rapidly collapsed into ruin, allowing the Xiongnu to once again exploit the vacuum and invade. But this was not the most critical factor. The crux of the matter was the rise of a formidable overlord among the Xiongnu, Modu Chanyu. His life's journey was the stuff of legend, painted with the broad strokes of an epic hero. He forged the disparate Xiongnu tribes into a unified force and crushed his powerful neighbors, the Donghu to the east and the Yuezhi to the west. From there, he waged war in all directions, conquering dozens of states and tribes, ultimately establishing the first true Steppe Empire in human history. Coupled with the glaring vacuum in the northern defenses during the tumultuous transition from the Qin to the Han Dynasty, the Xiongnu were able to raid southward with absolute impunity. They plundered vast numbers of people and immense wealth, but most crucially, they seized weapons, iron tools, and skilled artisans. Historical records state that by the early Han Dynasty, Modu Chanyu commanded 300,000 string-drawing warriors. More importantly, this was no longer a primitive horde wielding bone-tipped arrows. It had evolved into a terrifying steppe war machine, one that had mastered iron-smelting blast furnaces, possessed dedicated military production lines, and fully absorbed the advanced metallurgy of the Qin and Han empires. Building upon territorial expansion and technological advancement, Modu Chanyu also orchestrated profound political reforms. He instituted the system of the 3 wings and 24 leaders, creatively establishing 3 distinct yet fully integrated components of the empire: the central domain, the left wing, and the right wing. He ingrained this tripartite principle into every facet of political, social, and military life. This ensured a degree of autonomy and vitality for the individual tribes while simultaneously binding them under a singular, unified imperial framework. It was a political system perfectly adapted to the unique, harsh environment of the steppe, and it became the foundational blueprint emulated by every subsequent steppe empire for the next millennium. In terms of ruling legitimacy, he also groundbreakingly mirrored the Central Plains dynasties by formulating the Steppe Empire's own Mandate of Heaven. He styled himself as born of heaven and earth, ordained by the sun and moon, the great Chanyu of the Xiongnu. This steppe-adapted concept of divine right was later inherited and utilized by all subsequent steppe empires, including the Turks and the Mongols. Therefore, in summary, Liu Bang and King Xin initially believed they were merely dealing with a nuisance of nomadic marauders. In reality, they were facing the first fully consolidated steppe empire. They were facing the Qin Shi Huang of the Great Steppe. It was precisely this catastrophic miscalculation that led to a series of subsequent fatal blunders by both Liu Bang and King Xin. King Xin had pushed his royal capital to the front lines, believing it would facilitate striking the Xiongnu, only to instantly find himself encircled by a heavy Xiongnu siege. Liu Bang, seeing that King Xin could not even repel a petty Xiongnu raid, assumed his once loyal subordinate was dragging his feet and harboring ulterior motives. Furious, Liu Bang harshly reprimanded him. Ultimately, unable to defeat the Xiongnu and deprived of any understanding from his emperor, King Xin defected. Modu Chanyu immediately ordered King Xin to march south from Mai and attack the Han Empire. Upon receiving the urgent military dispatches, a furious Liu Bang personally took the field, marching 300,000 troops out of Luoyang. Within his pacification army, the core military commanders included legendary generals Fan Kuai, Guan Ying, and Zhou Bo, and hidden within the strategic command tent, he deliberately brought along Chen Ping, acting as the military superintendent to monitor the troops. Liu Bang had already planned for the post-war purges. Having long served as a frontline commander for the Han army, King Xin's combat prowess was certainly not to be underestimated. In a mere month, he occupied almost the entirety of Taiyuan Commandery. His vanguard then swept south, breaching Shangdang Commandery, before finally colliding with the northward marching main force of the Han army at Tongdi. There, a tense standoff ensued. This battlefield was barely 100 kilometers from the banks of the Yellow River and less than 250 kilometers from the imperial capital. During the Battle of Tongdi, Liu Bang once again showcased his astonishing military genius. While the Han main force remained locked in a frontline standoff with King Xin's army, Liu Bang took his top generals, Zhou Bo and Guan Ying, and led a small detachment of elite cavalry and chariots on a massive strategic envelopment. Slipping through the state of Dai to the east of Tongdi, they entirely bypassed King Xin's main force and thrust deeply into Taiyuan, Yunzhong, and Yanmen. They wreaked absolute havoc on King Xin's rear, severing his supply lines and isolating his base of operations. In the process, the troops personally led by Liu Bang even intercepted and routed a contingent of Xiongnu cavalry riding to reinforce King Xin. Liu Bang then wheeled back south toward Tongdi, catching King Xin in a devastating pincer attack between his detachment and the main Han army. King Xin's forces were crushed in a single decisive battle. His top generals were slain in action, his army collapsed, and he himself fled into exile among the Xiongnu with a handful of loyal retainers. Following the victory at Tongdi, Liu Bang reunited with his main force and continued marching his 300,000-strong army northward, reclaiming the lost territories. Near Taiyuan, the Xiongnu dispatched roughly 10,000 cavalry, who merged with the fleeing remnants of King Xin's forces. Totaling less than 50,000 men, they were naturally no match for the mighty Han army and suffered another crushing defeat. Taiyuan was successfully recovered. Successive victories elated Liu Bang, but his failure to capture King Xin left him bitterly disappointed. In his mind, only the capture and personal execution of the very traitor he had single-handedly cultivated could quench the burning hatred in his heart. Therefore, after recapturing Taiyuan Commandery, the Han army did not halt. Instead, they pressed the offensive northward, determined to reclaim Yanmen Commandery and Mai. By this time, the dead of winter had set in, and dissenting voices began to emerge within the Han ranks. A marquis pointed out that the Xiongnu forces they had encountered appeared to consist solely of the old and weak. He argued this was a blatant display of feigned weakness, undoubtedly masking a hidden stratagem and an ambush. His urgent counsel was to immediately cease the pursuit. The result? Liu Bang erupted in fury. "You captive of Qi! You earned your post with nothing but your tongue, and now you dare to demoralize my army with your wild ravings." This is the account recorded in Sima Qian's Records of the Grand Historian, where Liu Bang, the man who fought 7 years of bloody wars to unify the realm, is depicted as a remarkably short-sighted tyrant bereft of basic military common sense. This is Sima Qian, a staunch anti-Han-Xiongnu War pacifist, smuggling his personal biases into this unofficial history. To oppose Liu Bang in text was, covertly, to oppose the aggressive military campaigns of the reigning Emperor Wu. So, what was the actual truth? We must cross-reference the biographies of other figures and delve into alternative historical records to deduce the true strategic objectives of the Han army and Liu Bang's decision-making. In reality, as Liu Bang marched north to suppress the rebellion, his understanding of the Xiongnu's true strength grew increasingly clear. He likely realized that defeating King Xin's forces was not decisive. If he did not inflict a devastating blow upon the Xiongnu themselves, there would simply be a second or a third King Xin. At the very least, he had to annihilate the Xiongnu forces that had breached the Great Wall into the state of Dai. Only by plugging the breach in the northern Great Wall could the campaign be considered a true crowning achievement. Therefore, while relentlessly hounding King Xin's remnants, Liu Bang continuously dispatched envoys and scouts northward to gather military intelligence. What was the core objective of this intelligence work? Was it to probe the Xiongnu's overall strength? Certainly not. It was to pinpoint the exact location of the Xiongnu's main force. Finally, the aggregated intelligence yielded a conclusion. The Grand Xiongnu army, led by Modu Chanyu himself, was encamped at Daegu. According to Sima Qian's narrative, upon hearing this news, Liu Bang personally led his chariot and cavalry forces and charged straight for Daegu, only to find old and weak soldiers. Then, overflowing with misplaced confidence, Liu Bang chased them all the way to Mount Baideng near Pingcheng, where he blundered into an encirclement of 400,000 Xiongnu troops. This narrative implies either that Sima Qian did not understand military strategy, or that he deliberately disparaged Liu Bang's martial prowess. Opening the map, we can clearly see the reality. The distance from Dai County to Pingcheng exceeds 130 kilometers, roughly the same distance as from Dai County to Taiyuan. However, the distance to Mai is less than 50 kilometers. In other words, if Liu Bang intended to take Mai, he had to secure Dai County first. Yet, when Liu Bang rushed to the vicinity of Pingcheng, the massive infantry army under General Zhou Bo was still pushing the front line near Mai and Lufan. This proves that the sequence of events was not Liu Bang conquering Taiyuan, then conquering Dai County, and then recklessly pursuing the enemy to Pingcheng. Rather, upon learning that the Xiongnu main force was in Dai County, Liu Bang prepared to execute yet another grand flanking maneuver. He aimed to swing wide from the east, capture Pingcheng to sever the Xiongnu main force's route of retreat, and then launch a devastating pincer attack from north and south alongside Zhou Bo's infantry. In Liu Bang's vision, this was to be a perfect replica of the Battle of Tongdi. However, the replica failed to materialize. Instead, it nearly culminated in a catastrophe. To execute a high-speed strategic envelopment, Liu Bang naturally only brought his elite cavalry and chariot forces. Liu Bang's plan was flawless, and its execution was precise. What he failed to anticipate, however, was Modu Chanyu's own strategic mobility. As a sovereign of the steppe, Modu Chanyu possessed an almost innate acuity for such strategic landscapes. He was never going to passively wait in Mai or Daegu for the Han army, which held distinct advantages in equipment and tactical discipline, to launch a coordinated assault. Furthermore, having witnessed the total collapse of King Xin's army, Modu Chanyu saw no necessity to hold the absolute front line. The Xiongnu never fought wars of attrition or rigid positional battles. Therefore, almost at the exact moment Liu Bang began his cavalry maneuver, Modu Chanyu initiated a strategic withdrawal. His objective was to disengage and return north of the Great Wall before the Han forces could firmly lock him into combat. Thus, one force swept from south to north, while the other moved from east to west. Liu Bang attacked Pingcheng, but lacking siege engines for his cavalry, he failed to breach the walls. Precisely at this moment, Modu Chanyu, leading his overwhelming Xiongnu horde, crashed directly into them. Caught off guard and with no avenue of retreat, Liu Bang was forced to abandon the siege and hastily deploy his forces onto the adjacent Mount Baideng, digging in to await reinforcements. This is the true reality of the Siege of Baideng. It was no rash advance built on continuous victories, nor was it a meticulously calculated lure designed to draw the enemy deep. It was simply a collision of two empires at the wrong time, in the wrong place. If it were not such a hasty, accidental collision, one could not explain the events that followed. Trapped in the dire straits of blinding snowstorms, with severed supply lines and no immediate reinforcements, the Han cavalry miraculously held their ground for 7 days and 7 nights, until the Xiongnu voluntarily lifted the siege. If the Xiongnu had truly, step by step, engineered the trap at Baideng, would 7 days not be ample time to launch an annihilating strike? If the Xiongnu truly held absolute tactical supremacy, how could the Han army possibly survive and escape under such extreme, hostile weather conditions? If it was truly a resounding Xiongnu victory, why did the two sides fail to sign any peace treaty or exact any immediate concessions? We must acknowledge that the chariot and cavalry forces led by Xiahou Ying and Guan Ying undoubtedly displayed terrifying combat resilience in this extreme encounter. A highly probable reality is that the Han army utilized their heavy chariot carriages to construct a makeshift defensive perimeter. Leveraging the blizzard and the mountainous terrain, they stubbornly repelled the Xiongnu's probing attacks. Modu Chanyu, faced with this unforeseen stalemate, surely took considerable time to process the situation. First, he had to verify that he had indeed trapped the emperor. Second, he had to organize his offensives to gauge whether he could actually swallow this elite enemy force. Third, he had to desperately gather intelligence on the movements of the main Han infantry to calculate exactly how much time he had left. While the Xiongnu Chanyu was still weighing his options, the Han military superintendent, Chen Ping, rode out of the camp alone and entered the main Xiongnu encampment to negotiate. Sima Qian records that Chen Ping bribed the Xiongnu queen, relying on her to persuade Modu Chanyu to show mercy. This is an immense joke and a glaring irony. In Sima Qian's own accounts, this was the very same Modu Chanyu who, to seize the throne, had ordered his men to shoot his favorite wife full of arrows, and who had willingly given away his women to appease enemies. Would a man like that suddenly yield to his wife's pillow talk? The more historical reality is likely that Modu Chanyu, unwilling to show weakness by formally receiving a Han envoy, used the queen as an intermediary mouthpiece. The negotiation process was nothing more than laying bare the facts, analyzing the cold logic, and weighing their relative strengths. The facts were stark. The Xiongnu could not digest this elite Han vanguard in a short time frame, and the 300,000-strong Han main force was marching day and night to relieve their emperor. Even if the Xiongnu managed to destroy Liu Bang, could Modu Chanyu guarantee that his own army would escape the ensuing wrath of the Han infantry? Both men were rational actors, and naturally they made rational decisions. Consequently, after a brutal 7-day and 7-night standoff, the massive Xiongnu army opened a gap in their encirclement. The men of the Han army, swords drawn, arrows nocked on taut bowstrings, maintained a state of hypervigilance to prevent any sudden Xiongnu ambush, and cautiously withdrew. Just as they broke free, Zhou Bo arrived with the 300,000-strong main army. Subsequently, the Grand Xiongnu army retreated north of the Great Wall. Liu Bang and his main force marched south. Although they had successfully reclaimed the lost territories south of the wall, they had failed to cripple the Xiongnu's main force, nor had they captured King Xin. The Battle of Pingcheng and the Siege of Baideng were not, in fact, a successful ambush, but rather an encounter battle full of accidents between two fledgling empires. However, this battle forced both empires to gain a crystal-clear understanding of their adversary, establishing the defining characteristics of their future clashes. In direct frontal combat, the Xiongnu were absolutely no match for the tactical discipline and superior equipment of the Han army. Yet, on a broader strategic echelon, the high mobility of the Xiongnu cavalry ensured they perpetually held the advantage of preemptive strikes, allowing them to calmly retreat whenever the Han army mounted a counter-offensive. The agonizingly long northern frontier dictated that the Han Empire could never perfectly repel every single Xiongnu incursion. Therefore, upon returning to Luoyang, Liu Bang released the man who had previously counseled him against advancing, and initiated the policies of heikin, marriage alliances, and border trade. He chose to use political and economic concessions to temporarily placate this formidable foe. In the eyes of the deeply pragmatic Liu Bang, this was no humiliation. It was an expedient, effective measure. Similarly, in his eyes, the Siege of Baideng was not a defeat. Though the ultimate strategic objective was not fully realized, it did not prevent him from generously rewarding the generals and soldiers who had fought. Among them, the greatest merit was awarded to Chen Ping, who was enfeoffed as the Marquis of Cunei with a massive domain of 10,000 households. Second was Zhou Bo, who had rushed to the rescue. He was awarded an additional 2,000 households and promoted to Grand Commandant. At this juncture, for the Han Empire, the Han-Xiongnu conflict was not yet the primary contradiction. For the newborn empire, the most pressing anxiety stemmed from untangling internal political hierarchies and the distribution of vested interests. On the northern frontier, a calm before the storm settled in. But in Luoyang and Chang'an, with the impending death of Liu Bang, dark clouds gathered, lightning flashed, and imperial storms raged one after another. How would Chen Ping and Zhou Bo, or even Xia Huying and Guan Ying, these veteran commanders of the Battle of Pingcheng, weather the coming tempests?